So this is the Outer Galaxy Lounge film reference book collection. Now, of course, today we have the internet, we have the Internet Movie Database, and our lives are much easier when it comes to finding film reference materials. You can pretty much find any fact that you're seeking online. You don't have to have a library of all these books. On the other hand, something that the internet doesn't have are the opinions of many scholars and many experts in the field of film, particularly the films of the great past. There's material in these books that you can't find unless you can find some PDFs of some of these books, which do exist online. But I don't know. Would Wakeman's World Film Directors Volumes 1 and 2 be available as material online? I don't think so. In any case, there are some books in here that got me started when I was in high school. This particular book was in my high school library back in 1978, 1979. The World Encyclopedia of the Film. This is exactly the same book. I mean, it's not the exact same copy, but it's exactly the same edition. Hell, I bought this on eBay for like a couple of dollars. And this is something at one time you would not have been able to find anywhere. But then when the internet opened up, you could pretty much find any old book that you wanted. And I tried to get as many of the old film reference books that I remember from high school and college so that I could have a good collection of them. Garbo, you're being arrogant again and covering up other reference books. This is actually not a reference book, but I did not have any other place to put it because it's a large book and I ran out of space. I'm not sure where you stand on the subject of film criticism. Film criticism at one point seemed to be a much more important thing than it is today. I don't know that there are any standards left. There aren't too many journalistic standards left, and I'm not saying that as someone from the left or from the right. It's not political. It's more a matter of certain cultural markers and knowledge that in many cases is being lost. But that gets into a larger discussion of film criticism overall in the press. You know, you don't have Pauline Kaels or Stanley Kaufmans and people like that anymore, who are part of an actual general overall conversation about film culture. But we don't have the film culture that we had. But I don't want to become a boomer and start bemoaning and wailing over the state of things. What I wanted to do today was just show you some film criticism books, and one in particular. Now, I think before I do that, I think we can all agree that we all expect a certain level of critical acumen when we encounter a critic. Let's say there's a critic that we follow, that we read frequently, whether it be online or in paper. We expect he or she or they to have a certain vast knowledge of the subject, and quite often they don't. But quite often we look to critics to provide a certain barometer, right? Over time, let's say, well, a good example would be Anthony Fantano in music on YouTube. Over time, you get a sense of where he stands on different genres and performers in music. And over time, he builds up a library and a catalog of reviews. And over time, you can see the evolution of his thought on certain bands and how their music evolves and how he assesses the albums based on that evolution to some extent and other factors. So basically, if you get familiar with any of these books, you start to see what the tastes of the author is and to understand the rationale behind the assessments. Now, the first book of film criticism that I ever bought, and I bought this back in, I think, 1978, is Leslie Hallowell's Film Guide. Leslie Hallowell was a British critic. He'd been criticizing films since, I guess, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and the 80s. And then in the 90s, another man took over the guide when Hallowell died. And I pored over this thing with great reverence and studied it. And what I did back in the 70s when I was trying to figure out what the great films were is I made a gigantic list of canonical films. I used all the reference books I could find to make a giant list so I knew what to watch based on a whole bunch of different critics. If they gave it 4 stars or 3.5 stars or 3 stars and gave it enthusiastic reviews, I'd write that down. I'd write it out of this, and I'd write it out of other books. This book, for instance, I would see who was saying what about particular movies. I would try to coalesce those together in one list so that I had a checklist. I was basically making a checklist is what I was doing, okay? A lot of film buffs in the past, and maybe they still do, make checklists to figure out what they want to see, what they should see, in order to understand movies and to form their own tastes and to formulate an overall aesthetic for themselves. Do people even form an aesthetic anymore? I don't know. I could go on a rant about Marvel Comics Universe movies, but we'll save that for another time maybe. So what I was saying, I was making a checklist and I was using all of these books and other books that are in there to come up with a list of things to see. So anyway, so Hallowell's was the first. I spent a lot of time with this book. It is well worn and the dust jacket got completely torn up, as you can see, but it's still holding together. I have a newer edition of this, and the ratings were changed a little bit in that to reflect the times and so on. They downgraded some films that Hallowell really liked a little bit, not a whole lot. The thing about Hallowell was he was a bad influence. You should not only read one guy. I got dogmatic because I read this book too well, too religiously. I came to believe everything this guy said, but he was consistent. He was very consistent in his opinion, and his opinion was very middlebrow. He didn't like new films. He didn't like violent movies. He didn't like contemporary movies. Now, contemporary, I mean the 70s. He did not like films from the 70s. He thought they had too much sex, too much violence, too much cussing, blah, 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 blah. Again, but missing the forest for the trees. That being said, his criticisms of Golden Age Hollywood movies and Golden Age foreign movies were quite good. I think he was on the ball when he was reviewing older films. His reviews of older films are fine. This is a really good guide if you want to know old classics. On the other hand, he had huge blind spots about old films too, of filmmakers we now respect. Like Sam Fuller was someone he absolutely dismissed. And, nowadays we hold Sam Fuller in some high regard. Now, he may not deserve it as much as some people think, but Hallowell just did not care about exploitation material that we now can see the value in. So for conventional Hollywood prestige pictures and so on, Hallowell was a good guy to refer to. But I had to get out of the Hallowell hole. At the same time I was getting into him, I was getting into Stephen Shore. Stephen Shore's book. I actually bought Stephen Shore's before I bought any of Leonard Maltin's. Stephen Shore was good. He was a good corrective to Hallowell because Shore liked intellectual, esoteric, foreign, and independent movies. So if you wanted to find out what some of the more obscure titles were, but nonetheless films just as good as some of the mainstream films, you would go to Shore. Shore was a great film guide. I really liked him, and you could see the consistency of his opinions, just like you could with Hallowell, even though their opinions were highly different. Hallowell again, Maltin is in the middle of the road. He's really good on the classic movies, but on some more contemporary movies, it's very wild. And the problem with Maltin's book, of course, is it was written by many, many people, not just Leonard Maltin. So you're getting a melange of opinions in this. He was the editor. He probably oversaw the final judgments. And there is a consistency in the book. This is good. This is kind of like a cross between these other two books. And it's the most popular film guide ever published, so you got to have some of those. Here's some good ones I really like. The Faber Foreign Film Guide. This is uniformly excellent. It has a good selection of foreign classics in it. And then this older film from George Sedul, who is a critic from way back. He was reviewing movies way back in the 1920s in France. This is an English edition that was done, I guess, in the early 70s by an editor, a British editor, who translated a lot of Sedul's criticism. And this is a great foundational text for old foreign classics, going up through mainly the 50s, and this British editor updated it into, I think, the 60s and 70s, so it was a little bit more expansive. But the opinions and the thoughts in here, while I don't agree with all of them, are very consistent. So here we have what I consider to be 5 really good film guides. Their opinions may not always agree with mine, but they don't have to. If you go between all these 5 books, you're going to find opinions that agree with yours. But that's not the point. The point is to learn, okay? So, that brings us to this. These films all have what I call a critical acumen. They have a barometer. You know when you read a bunch of their stuff where they're going to come out. There's a sensibility at work in these books, a critical sensibility. You understand which elements they like and why, and you can see how they apply to individual titles. This book, on the other hand, seems to have no critical acumen whatsoever, and I'm not quite sure why it even exists. So this is the Film Buff's checklist of motion pictures 1912 to 1979, edited by D. Richard Bear. It was done in 1979 in Hollywood. I don't know if there was any more published. Supposedly this is a sequel to another book called The Film Lover's Bible from 72, and this was, I guess, an updated and expanded version. I don't know if they ever published any more after this. It was compiled. It has, I don't know, what, 12,000 or so films in it? How much does it say? I don't know. The number's in there. The strong suits of this book, although now a book like this is highly redundant and unnecessary, but in the pre-internet days, a book like this did have value. As a neutral film guide, in other words, one that tells you the title, the year it was made, whether it was in color and black and white, who directed it, how long it was, who the main stars were, who did the music score, and who wrote the script, and basic facts, it's fine. It's fine as a neutral guide and as a checklist. It's basically, back then it was hard to get a list of films, period. You know, if you were just looking for a list of movies, you couldn't just jump on a computer. Nobody had them. You had to find books like this. And there just weren't books like this. But at some point, they decided they were going to review the movies and pass judgment on them. Being a neutral guide with just facts is one thing, but once you step into the peril-fraught world of criticism and judgment, at that point, some kind of critical acumen has to kick in, and this book has none. This book basically says that a movie is bad or a movie is good. That's it. For someone to take on the Herculean task of compiling, back in the day when it wasn't so easy to do so, a book of thousands of titles, to get very difficult to come by facts and compile them, it must have been a Sisyphean task, honestly. And then after all of that, to appear to have no love for the movies at all, it's something quite confounding. It's amazing. This book literally thinks that about 99% of cinema history is no good. I'm not kidding. I mean, you think I'm exaggerating. I don't know why anybody enthusiastic about a topic would go to the trouble to basically trash all of film history. Basically anything old was considered unwatchable by the guy who edited this book. It's unbelievable. You know, being neutral is one thing. Offering neutral facts is one thing. But when you take on the imprimatur of judgment, that's quite another. So anyway, let's read a little bit of this. It starts off pretty well. So this is called the Film Buff's Checklist, and it is an expanded and revised version of a 1972 book, The Film Buff's Bible. Here he says the new book contains information compiled through June 1979 and includes titles of a number of major films to be released through the end of '79. We now list some 19,000 alphabetized titles. Pretty impressive for the time. So it says you've got a book in order to look up information about movies, etc. So he explains how it's organized, why the titles are organized the way they are. The film distributors are mentioned. Alternative titles are mentioned. Color and black and white, running time, the country the film was made from or in. Cast, and the crux of the matter here that has drawn my ire, the entertainment ratings. I'm going to read this to you. I'm just going to read it as is and listen to what this says very carefully. Tell me if at any point you hear anything that resembles a critical acumen about how to judge films at all. Okay? Let me start. Entertainment ratings. We rate all films we have seen on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 is highest. Since these, unlike all the other information, are a matter of value judgment, They naturally cause a certain amount of controversy and confusion. All right, Mr. Richard D. Baer, editor of the Film Bus Checklist, tell me what standards you're using, therefore, to arrive at your entertainment ratings. Let's see. Only by not printing ratings could we avoid the controversy, and since a significant proportion of our readers find them valuable, to do so would deprive them of information they are seeking. All right? So people want your opinion, basically. All right. Perhaps, however, by explaining what the ratings are and are not, we can avoid some of the confusion. Okay, I really want to see this spelled out and delineated, so let's see. Bold-faced numerical ratings followed by an asterisk represent the opinions of the executive and senior editors as to the entertainment value of each movie seen and rated by them. All right, we don't know who they are, we don't know what standards they have, and we don't know what the hell an entertainment value is, do we? What exactly is that? What two people are entertained similarly by any particular title? I don't know, but let's see what else he has to say. The ratings in parentheses represent the editor's estimates of ratings for films. Okay, wait for it here, guys. The ratings in parentheses represent the editor's estimates of ratings for films not yet seen. They're guessing what their ratings are for movies they haven't seen. All right? All right. Yes, you see where this is going. These estimates are variously based on reviews. Okay, that's fair. Reputation, popularity, intuition, and other factors. Naturally, they tend to be less accurate, yeah, than asterisk ratings in reflecting our judgment. I don't know who these our people are. I think it's just one guy, but I could be wrong. But we find that when a film with an estimated rating is eventually assigned an asterisk rating, it usually is within 1 point of the estimate. How convenient. It's no sin for a film to make a... Okay, all right, here's where we go into the weeds, guys. It's no sin for a film to make a profound sociological comment, of course. Expose government injustice or corruption, as if that is an automatic standard to apply to aesthetics. But continue. Promote racial tolerance and or international brotherhood, etc. He thinks every critic apparently is Bosley Crowther, but okay. But none of those qualities will necessarily make a film qualify for a high rating. No shit, Sherlock. Neither do we necessarily assign negative ratings for expressing opposite points of view. Opposite points of view to what? Some people can reasonably argue that it's impossible to adequately evaluate a film's direction, casting, acting, production values, cinematography, script, and story, etc. in a single number, but all the rating actually attempts to do, oh boy, is answer the basic question, how was it? How was it? So guys, if we can answer the basic question, how was it, our answer as to whether the film is good or not is going to be quite clear. So Billy Bob, how was that car crash movie where 10 women are assaulted and the guy has his face bitten off by rats and there are 10 million explosions and nothing terribly intelligent goes on? Well, I thought it was the best damn movie of all time. Well, Percy C. Snodgrass, what did you think of it? I thought it was terrible. So how was it? Two different guys, two different opinions, two different responses. So this guy's how was it supersedes all other how was it's, I guess. How was it? Okay, that's our critical acumen. How was it, according to this one guy? Yes, these guys tell you that, but there's some basis for what the hell they're saying. All right, let's continue. Between ratings 1 and 8, a film rated a whole number above another means it's about twice as good as the lower rated film. What is this, the Richter scale? Okay. Even a half point then represents more than just a subtle difference in quality, and there can be substantial differences within a half point range. There are no ratings of 8.5 or 9.5, and the 9 and 10 ratings do not indicate 100% quality increases, as in the 1 to 8 range. Rather, the ratings of 8, 9, and 10 are all varying degrees of excellence. So, 10 is superb and 1 is terrible. Okay, so you get the various gradients of that between them. But, 2 being poor, definitely not worth watching. Okay, it's not 2 film lacks this, that, or the other thing. It's poor, definitely not worth watching. In other words, it tells us absolutely nothing. What is this? 24 movies, maybe, in the history of cinema that are rated 7.5 to 10. The rest of the movies in this book are below 7.5. In fact, if you go through this, the majority of the films in here are 3, 4, and 5 rated films. And films like Citizen Kane, demonstrably great movies, he gives like 5 stars. It's insane. When I say 5 stars, I mean a 5 out of 10. Not a 10, not a 9, not an 8. So let's see what he's given a 10, all right? Cabaret, 1972. Cabaret is a good film. Is it a 10? Is it the greatest film ever made, according to this guy? I don't think so. So there's only 2 movies in here in the history of cinema that get a 10. Cabaret, 1972, and Elmer Gantry from 1960. Elmer Gantry was actually one of my dad's favorite movies. It is a good movie. Is it a 10? I would say it's an 8, maybe. But again, I would have to explain why that is, and this guy doesn't really do that. So, My Fair Lady are a 9, okay? So My Fair Lady is better than all the other MGM musicals that were made. Of course, that's not an MGM, but Midnight Cowboy, 9, West Side Story. So he has a bias towards 60s and 70s films. Alfie, Casablanca. Casablanca is the only old movie that gets a high rating. Deliverance, Exorcist, Graduate, Godfather, Jaws, 1, 2, 3, Billy Wilder, 61. Room at the Top, the British film, 58, 59. Star Wars, 77, Tom Jones, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, American Graffiti, Apprentices for Duddy Kravitz, a film that really nobody talks about today, even though it is good. Ben-Hur, Butch Cassidy, French Connection, blah, 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 blah. 2 for the Road and Peloton. So let's look at some of these rated 9 and 8 level films, okay? This is the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop. My Fair Lady is rated a 9, and something like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is rated an 8. So basically, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and My Fair Lady on this same list. 2 very different films. One dark and emotionally traumatic, maybe even triggering for some, and one light as a feather. Bouncy musical confection. Now, I know people who tend to like entertaining films who can't sit through Virginia Woolf, but have no trouble sitting through some of these lighter films. How is an entertainment value a thing when no 2 films are alike and no 2 people are entertained similarly by any 2 different films? So what exactly is a film to this guy, apart from maybe a roller coaster to get a buzz off of and forget? What does "how was it" mean if we don't know what he bases "how was it" on? What qualities constitute entertainment apart from bald-faced, knee-jerk reactions, according to this one person who we otherwise have no barometric taste sense of? Does this guy ever address matters of style, originality, pizzazz, elan, authenticity, depth of meaning, audacity of subject matter, theme and execution, how or how not a film is groundbreaking, its narrative invention, economy, complexity, acting, dialogue, script, cinematography, clever use of resources, sets, design, brilliance of direction? None of this matters, apparently. Or how all these aspects, in whole or in part, can be supremely entertaining to someone who recognizes them, who realizes something fresh, new, vital, insightful, charming, or in the case of homage, how it's true to the spirit of the homage. Is a film a piece of tasty candy only, or does its various aspects entertain different parts of the mind and psyche? Unless there's an aesthetic behind the judgment, the "how was it" is meaningless. Not that it already isn't. So let's get real here. Honestly, I do have a problem with the idea that, quote, my opinion on film is just as good as yours, unquote, in the sense that I think Transformers is good, but Rules of the Game is bad because Rules of the Game bores me. The knowledge behind the opinion is very important to the quality of the opinion. Let's get real about that. A person with a vast and broad international long-term movie experience has a barometer and an acumen, a cross-reference library of knowledge to determine quality, originality, and so forth. But yes, even then, a good critic can miss the boat, and sometimes they even recant. Why? Because they can evolve, listen, rethink, reassess. Does the mentality of this book leave that possibility open? I see no evidence of it. So, let's get real. This book, honestly, is not the real culprit, now is it? It's what it represents in the general scheme. It's the attitude this book pushes, and even brags about pushing. That stupid and proud of it mentality, which is worse than ever in our society now, where experts don't really know anything, but people who don't know shit are the real experts. Anything deeper than surface to this book is suspect. It cannot possibly engage and stimulate, and yes, even entertain. This book is about an attitude I absolutely cannot stand and actively fight against. If your approach to film is the same as this guy's, you are never going to come close to realizing the full pleasure of movie-going or of art, period. You'll never grow intellectually, never exercise that mental muscle, and all of that has a cascading effect on everything else in your thinking and in your life. So he has a preference toward mid to late 60s to early 70s, moderate to large hit films. There's nothing made in the entirety of the rest of the world, outside of Hollywood and Britain, that this guy thinks is worth a damn. So, you know, if you think 8.5 is good, this guy's going to say that's pretentious. That's all. He's just going to dismiss it out of hand. France made no great films, according to this guy. Germany, Japan, South American countries, no great films came out of any of those other places, according to this guy. All right? You see how bad this is? And here he just puts the nail in the coffin of his awfulness. Let's see. We can recognize praiseworthy... Okay. We are aware that the preceding list has only one film each for John Ford, William Wyler, and no films of Charlie Chaplin, Howard Hawks, Laurence Olivier, D.W. Griffith, Orson Welles, or Alfred Hitchcock. Can you believe that? His top film list has no films by these masters. And they all made, you know, scads of masterpieces. Lots and lots of them. But none of them are going to be here. All right. We can recognize praiseworthy achievements by all of these individuals, but we have no sacred cows or demigods. It's like he's being attacked. It's like he's having this kind of a defensive stance, which you ought to when your critical acumen is this awful. The list contains no foreign language films, but they're eligible, of course. We have several rated at 7 in the book. We also hear objections that our highest rated movies are too heavily represented by films released from 1960 to the present. Yes, film critics and scholars may cry blasphemy, but we suspect there is far more agreement among most contemporary general film-going audiences with our philosophy of film entertainment ratings, which can be summed up in 2 brief sentences. So this is the critical acumen he's using right here, guys. Listen. Each film must stand on its own merits in comparison to the films of all other periods and nationalities. The best movies of all time have been made since the late 50s in the U.S. and Great Britain. So, why might he say these things? We never find out. This editor has somehow gotten into the heads of the hoi polloi of the public, the vox populi, and figured out exactly what they like, and it conveniently jibes with what he likes. Well, I don't know, other than box office, how do you even determine that? Is box office going to be our standard? So basically, Planet of the Apes and Pillow Talk, which are 2 good films, don't get me wrong, they're both classics, are nonetheless greater than, 400 Blows and Wild Strawberries, Day of Wrath, Passion of Joan of Arc, Sunrise, The Gold Rush, Citizen Kane. And, think of all the great masterpieces. Pillow Talk is better than all those, somehow. And, it just keeps adding insult to injury. Filmmakers of the past may have had minds as good as those of today, but they certainly didn't have the same equipment, artistic freedom, and creative environment. You know what? Their equipment was just fine. There's nothing wrong. If you look at a good print of a film made on a good camera in the 20s, it's incredibly beautiful. The cinematography is gorgeous. The nitrate film gives it a quality that no modern films have. An old film can technically be quite impressive. This is just condescending horse shit, and the guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. And it goes the same with foreign filmmakers. Foreign filmmakers may someday make films as good or better than what we now consider excellent. Yeah, they have. But very few of them have thus far demonstrated the capability of doing so. Based on what? Fellini, Bergman, and all the rest. They don't make anything worth a damn. It's like, this guy would say, because Jacqueline Suzanne is entertaining and sold, 10 million copies of something. She's better than Shakespeare, because, that's just old stuff. What the hell? It has no value. There's no aesthetic value, no insight, nothing to engage a person in any of that old crap. Nothing timeless in it, nothing profound, nothing engaging, nothing entertaining. So our entertainment ratings, which are based on no apparent standard, no delineated standard in any case, is the only standard by which a film is judged, even when this guy admits he hasn't seen anything practically. There's no weighted rating for any other perceived qualities. So here, look at this. Then again, a film like Smokey and the Bandit, rated 5.5. There's nothing wrong with Smokey and the Bandit, okay? I'm not saying there is. Has far more appeal, true, to the latter type of audience than Women in Love, rated 3.5. 3.5. Wow. I found Women in Love quite entertaining. A film with more college audience appeal. So college audiences are completely discounted. Their entertainment means nothing. So this is interesting. Keep in mind what this book is called, and listen to this sentence. Remember, this is the Film Buffs checklist. It's for film buffs, right? Nobody but film buffs are going to buy this, or would have bought this. We realize that we can't always satisfy even the majority of users of this book, who, by the way, would be film buffs. Nobody else. Hopefully, those who lament our giving a low rating to their favorite film will understand that the ratings are more for the benefit of those who have not seen a particular film than for those who have seen the same film and have an established opinion about it. So if this guy has rated a whole bunch of great films that people who may like, who read this book, as a low rating, how are they going to be able to trust all the other ratings that the book gives for films they haven't seen? You see what I'm saying? It's like, if this guy has rated a bunch of great films low, then how is a person who hasn't seen a film going to know with any kind of certainty or trust that these guys know what they're talking about? So I'm not sure, who is this for? Like, this is a film buffs checklist. Film buffs. Wouldn't a film buff want to know what the actual opinion of the film book's author is on a film? And what is the source aesthetic of said opinion? So, to follow up on this point, these ratings are for those who have not seen a particular film. I want to show you something. Let me just open a random page of this book. Here, look at this column here. Remember that films in parentheses are films they have not seen. Films with asterisks are films they have seen. So let's look at this column. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, 19 films in that column. What have they not seen? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 out of the movies that they're giving a rating to in here they haven't seen, but they want us to believe their rating as to what we would like. How is that possible? They literally have not seen almost 3/4 of the films they're rating, but they're giving the ratings to people who may want a rating for something they haven't seen. Not only have the people they're writing for not seen them, but these guys haven't either. Since we recognize that there are other significant schools of thought about film evaluation, let us briefly describe them. So he goes in and says the classic school, 1915 and 1950, or some of the best, you mentioned some of the best films of their time and all time, but these circumstances are a little more than curious interest to modern film watchers. Are they? Is that true? I know most modern film watchers don't want to see old films, but that's not the problem of films. That's the problem of the viewers. That's the same with literature. You know, literature that's challenging is not bad because you don't understand it, okay? Oh my God, this is so... I mean, this is the absolute epitome of Philistinism. And I know I sound pretentious saying that, but can you see why this infuriates me? The art house school. Well, what does he think art house constitutes? Let's see. We actually heard the reason we sometimes see only paralyzingly boring, hopelessly muddled, plotless nonsense in foreign language films is because the best foreign directors are so far ahead of the best American directors in filmmaking ability that we can't realize how much better they are. What kind of a circular sentence is that? The art house critics may not hate all box office champions, like The Godfather, Jaws, and Star Wars, but they generally discount them as common entertainment for hoi polloi, while hailing the likes of Cries and Whispers, 8.5, and La Ventura. Yeah, Cries and Whispers, 8.5, and La Ventura are great films, dumb fuck, as among the truly great films. Yes, they are. Perhaps those of us who prefer films with a beginning, middle, and an end will never understand why. How does Cries and Whispers, 8.5, and La Ventura not have a beginning, middle, and an end? They do. Cries and Whispers shows the ordeal of a family going through someone with cancer. Does that mean it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and an end? And so what? What is this arbitrary way of looking at art? 8.5. It starts out with the guy being confused and then coming to some kind of realization about his life and his art, and coming to an epiphany of sorts. How is that not a beginning, middle, and an end? This is fucking idiotic. The cinematic school. And it's you know what? Fuck this book, man. Fuck this shit. I'm out of here. So basically it comes down to if a film has a beginning and a middle and an end, as this guy understands the concept of that, then it's a good movie. And if it entertains everybody, which cannot be universally applied whatsoever. So basically, it's this guy not wanting to put any work or any effort into his film viewing and his art. And in fact, he doesn't think film is an art at all, quite obviously. So there you have it, guys. A film book written and edited by someone who has not the slightest clue about films. The Film Buff's Checklist. If you can get a copy and want a good laugh or just get pissed off like I did, then look for a copy somewhere. This is the Outer Galaxy Lounge man signing off.